You're live.
Great. So Becky Wasserman, Legislative Counsel. I will start off the meeting for the Joint Information Technology Oversight Committee by doing an election for the new chair of the committee. So I'll first ask if there are any nominations for the chair position. Yes, Senator Pearson.
I believe the standard is we shift to a Senate chair. So I'd be honored to nominate Senator Brock, who's been an able vice chair. I think for a hot minute was the chair in the very first week of this iteration, and then it shifted session. So I hope we might support Randy. Knowledgeable, thorough, hardworking, good guy, as we know.
Great. Are there any other nominations? Okay, seeing none, I can call the question. So all those in favor of Senator Brock serving as chair of the committee, say aye or raise a hand or
Aye.
Aye.
okay. Okay, great. And those opposed, seeing none. Senator Brock, as the new chair, do you want to go ahead with the election of the vice chair?
Absolutely, and thank you very, very much, everyone, for your support, especially for Senator Pierce's glowing endorsement. The next item on the agenda is the election of a vice chair, and nominations are open for a vice chair. Do we have any nominations for vice chair?
I would nominate Seth Chase.
Okay, a nomination of Representative Chase has been made. Are there any other nominations for vice chair? Then we would suggest that nominations be closed and that all those who are in favor of Representative Seth Chase for vice chair, please say aye or raise your hands.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
And Representative Chase is vice chair, and congratulations and welcome. And thank you also to Representative Sebalia for her able leadership as chair over the past 2 years. I think we certainly have made progress, and she should be congratulated for the work that she's done. And I know she's worked very hard over this past 2 years to bolster the committee and make it better than what it was. In terms of what we do going forward, I think the first agenda item is to go to Becky Wasserman to tell us a little bit about and refresh our memories regarding the charge of the committee, as well as the tasks to which we've been assigned. And so, Becky, can we turn the floor over to you?
Sure. I will just bring up on the screen the enacting language for the committee, just to remind everyone what the powers and duties of the committee are. Okay. Let me see if I can, oops, wrong button. Where is the zoom in on? Can you all see this, or is that?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so just as a reminder, the enacting language for the committee was enacted in 2018. And the committee, it was created, the Joint Information Technology Oversight Committee was created to oversee investments in and use of IT in Vermont. In terms of membership, as you know, there are 6 members, 3 House members and 3 Senate members. And then with respect to the powers and duties of the committee is tasked with overseeing, evaluating, making recommendations on the following. So first is the state's current deployment, management, and oversight of IT and the furtherance of state governmental activities. So pretty much looking at all state IT systems and activities, and these include data processing systems, telecom networks, and related technologies, with particularly looking at issues of compatibility amongst existing and proposed technologies. Next, the committee looks at issues relating to storage, maintenance, access to, and privacy of, and restrictions on use of computerized records. The committee also looks at issues of public policy relating to development and promotion of the private, commercial, and nonprofit information infrastructure in the state, how that relates to state government information infrastructure, and how it's integrated with national and international information networks. And then finally, the committee looks at issues of cybersecurity. So you all have the assistance of Ledge Council and JFO. As we all just went through this process, you elect a chair and a vice chair and adopt rules of procedure, and those chair positions rotate biennially between the Senate and House members. The committee meets when the General Assembly is not in session or at the call of the chair, but there are no caps on the amount of meetings that you can have off session. And then finally, the committee members are reimbursed for attendance at meetings during adjournment of the General Assembly. So are there any questions on the responsibilities of the committee?
I think one thing, and perhaps you're planning to do this, Becky, is also to talk about the extent to which there are any special requirements placed on the committee based on what the General Assembly did, particularly in the last session, that we also will need to address during this next period.
Sure. So I know today there is going to be a discussion on the EUI systems, and there was some language in the budget with respect to this committee needing to approve the release of funds for those systems. And then the Ledge Council and the Office of Ledge Operations are in the process of compiling a list of sort of reports and responsibilities that were included in legislation in this past session. And I don't know, Mike Ferrant can maybe give a better estimate, but I think we're nearly done with that process, but not quite. So at the next meeting, we'll be able to hand out to all committee members a report that we can go through with you to make you aware of what all the other responsibilities are off session for this committee.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions for Becky or generally in terms of what the overall responsibilities of the committee are at this point? We have an agenda for the meeting, and I believe I don't have the agenda in front of me, but I believe the next item that we have on the agenda is to speak with Secretary Quinn, in particular regarding where we are on UI. Is that correct? Do you have, by the way, Mike, do we have a copy of the agenda that could be put up on the screen?
Yes, I will put that agenda right up on the screen.
That way we can follow where we are, at least as a starting point.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Chair, just let me know when you're ready.
I'm ready.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad I asked, or I'd be sitting here looking at all of you wondering. For the record, I'm John Quinn. I'm the state CIO and Secretary of Digital Services. I, like many Vermonters, am experiencing some internet issues today. So I'm going to have my Deputy Secretary, Sean Naylor, run the presentation. Sean was our lead point person on this because it was such an important task throughout the pandemic and affected so many Vermonters. We sent Sean down to assist Commissioner Harrington with the Department of Labor, not only on the mainframe side, but logistics of coordinating efforts to ensure that Vermonters get their checks as quickly as possible. And so with that, Sean's presentation that he put together has, made it around between ADS and the Department of Labor, and we all agree on the approach, and we're excited to present it to you. I think in the regular session, things got a little busy, and while we gave the presentation at a high level to energy and technology, I'm not sure we ever had the opportunity in the Senate side. So we're excited to be able to show it to you all today and answer any questions that you may have. And with that, I'm going to have Sean go ahead and share his screen and get started.
Great. Good morning. For the record, Deputy Secretary Sean Naylor, ENC Digital Services. Thank you for this opportunity today. First, the sound check. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. I'm going to go ahead. I don't know if I have permission. I'm going to try sharing my presentation that you have. Please let me know if you see it.
I see it.
Outstanding.
Okay. Hope everyone else can.
Fine.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. So today we've put together a presentation to go over the approach we have identified as the way to move forward with modernizing the unemployment insurance systems for the state of Vermont down at the Department of Labor. Today the kind of flow will be a little bit of a background of how we got to where we are. We'll then kind of give an example of the current state of the systems there, go into what our planned architecture or our approach is at a very high level, followed up by information around the schedule, the costs, and then wrapping up with looking at how did we land on this, giving some context of the things that came into factors for consideration in what we have designed and what we're proposing here today. And feel free to ask questions at any moment. I'm going to be focused on the presentation, so just let me know. I may not see you if you raise a hand, so feel free to let me know. So, background for those that some may or may not know, the state of Vermont Department of Labor was a member of a consortium with the states of Idaho and South Dakota that dissolved just prior to the pandemic. That dissolved due to the consortium not being able to produce the technical systems that were required to effectively modernize the UI systems for the state of Vermont and be able to retire the mainframe. We then, obviously the pandemic hit, and to say we had mixed success at the Department of Labor. The mainframe, as many of you are aware, was a challenge for us. The age of it being 50 years old, the technology being of that same vintage, really didn't allow for the flexibility that the pandemic really was asking of us to be able to support Vermonters. One of the bright pieces that came out of that from a technology perspective was the PUA program, Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, by which we applied one of our adopted platforms, Salesforce, to allow for Vermonters, claimants that were eligible to apply for and then have their benefits administered through that platform. And so as we look to what the challenges were, some of the positives to come from this, those fed into, and along with our understanding of kind of the landscape for UI modernization in other states and vendors to put this plan together, that what you'll see is us relying heavily on the existing platforms that we have identified for use for Vermont to build upon, and then replacing the core UI functionality that currently resides on the mainframe with a specific solution that is proven successful in other states. Any questions before I move on?
Before Sean goes on, before Sean goes on, I would just remind all of you, or a lot of you that have either heard me testify about this or been around long enough to remember, Vermont's been a part of more than one consortium. In fact, you know, in what may look like a failure, we were actually successful in getting out of both of those. The first one still doesn't have a working product over 10 years later. The second one still doesn't have a working product and has dissolved. So while it may appear, Vermont has struggled here, I think all states across the United States have struggled in this consortium model, and only one, to my knowledge, has been successful to this point. So, this is not something specific to Vermont as far as, fits and starts with the replacement of UI systems. And that I'll turn back over to Sean.
I actually have a quick question.
Yes.
Secretary Quinn, can you tell us which states have systems that did well through the pandemic? Are there any?
Sean may have a couple of specific examples. I wouldn't classify them as doing well. I would classify them as having the least amount of issues. And it all depends on how you look at it, if it's a per capita or number of overall people. But many struggled with this across the United States. Sean, do you have any specific examples that stick out in your mind of
yeah, I
states
know
that did well?
It's hard to say they did well. Those that were quicker to provide benefits, especially with the programs that were not traditional UI, were states like Mississippi, Alabama. And we'll see later in the presentation, they are using they've already selected products that are modernized, and that allowed them the flexibility to be able to accommodate these, the different programs. It was, for most states like Vermont, it was the difference between how traditional UI was administered and then the different programs that came out to help during the course of the pandemic, that most systems across the country didn't have that flexibility to be able to accommodate easily.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions before we move on? Thank you. I'm hoping you can see this. It may not be, you may not be able to read the text, and it's really there for context. This is actually a diagram that is part of the RFP that's being finalized right now for the UI system modernization. And what I'd like to kind of emphasize is that those boxes that are in the kind of the bluish gray highlighting are customer facing. And so there are 14 different pieces that are distinct, that are customer facing in this system out of all of these components that comprise the UI system. That's important to bear in mind as you think about the constituent experience, right? I mean, that there just alone makes it so that you're going to have a hard time being consistent and provide a user experience that is not cumbersome. So when we look, these are all of the things that had to work, and it's not just the boxes, but all of the lines that connect the boxes were all technology pieces that at times were frail and contributed to why we had the challenges we did responding to the pandemic with our current UI system. If there's no questions, I'll move on. So this diagram.
I do have one, sorry.
I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead.
So the out of scope pieces, the domestic violence being a paper, out of scope, I presume means not part of what we're building here. So the domestic violence being a paper system, that makes sense to me. The short time compensation program.
Yeah, that's a one-off that is isolated, but since this diagram has been done, one of the things that we have talked about is using the lessons learned during the pandemic, which means the next system needs to have that flexibility to stand up, let's call them ad hoc benefit programs. And so that will be something that will be part of the system moving forward. It may not be titled that specifically, but that flexibility is a requirement.
Great.
Any other questions?
May I ask a question as well?
Yes.
Thank you. And I'm sorry if you did say this, and I would love to chat about this maybe offline. But on that previous slide, do you have any quick comments on how many of these customer-facing, the blue boxes, how many of them are integrated with the myvermont.org or myvermont.gov web platform when it comes to single sign-on or identification of how they're interfacing with the state?
The short answer is none.
Okay.
At this time. And that's been one of the challenges. What I will draw attention to is in the lower left-hand corner, you see that Salesforce boxes. This is for general UI and PUA applicants. And we're currently working on integrating our user management platform. It's called Okta, which will allow for that myvermont.gov account to be shared across these applications moving forward. And thank you. That's a wonderful segue to the next slide. Any other questions? Okay. So this is the proposed architecture, our planned architecture for moving forward with the UI system modernization. What I'm attempting to depict here, and I'll walk you through it, and then please let me know if you have any questions, is that there are going to be 6 major components to the system compared to the couple of dozen that were on the previous slide. Those 6 major components are, 2 of them are going to be unique to unemployment insurance, and then 4 of them are common platforms that we've implemented across the state already and will be leveraging for this project. So starting at the top, the customer-facing sites and applications, that is what is identified as the phase 1 work. That is what we're here about today, is for the money to accomplish that. It's anticipated to be 12 to 15 months long and cost the state $3.5 million. And when I say the customer facing, that is in essence rolling up all of the functionality that was in the 14 disparate bluish gray boxes on the previous slide into a single system to present to constituents and employers to be able to interact and have a not only a modern, but just a standardized experience that is adaptable moving forward. So that's phase 1. Tying the core system together, and before we get to the mainframe replacement, is 4 key platforms that are kind of underpinning this, and that's user management. So that's the like myvermont.gov ability for a standard user to be authenticated to log in. And that's an Okta platform. Oops, sorry about that. And with that, we've already implemented in the state. And we're actually now, as I alluded to, we're working on that to implement with the current environment in order to help deter the fraud attempts that we're seeing through the UI system programs. The next underpinning technology is for document management. This is a product called OnBase from Highland. And this is in place and has been in use across the state, but we actually implemented it for the first time at the Department of Labor for the pandemic unemployment assistance program, when individuals had to provide proof of income and other documentation as part of it, we wanted to make sure it was managed in a proper document management system. And so that was adopted there and has already been implemented down there. Application integration. This is what allows us to tie the different systems together and do it consistently. Is a product by called MuleSoft, and it is already in place in the state and is being used at the Department of Labor to facilitate the exchanging of data that happens now in Salesforce. So when Sean Naylor, as a citizen, constituent comes in and needs to make my initial claim, I do it through the current Salesforce application. That information is passed to the mainframe for processing using this technology. So we've already have it in place and it's proven and working well. And then lastly is for reporting and analytics, a product called Power BI, which is from Microsoft, which allows for people to do things like dashboards, ad hoc querying, the ability to monitor. Again, we use that as the secretary spoke to when I was at the Department of Labor. We were using it to do stuff from monitoring call center volume and using it to analyze that information on a daily basis to a number of claims coming in. So, you know, those are technologies we've already implemented and are proven and are giving us value at the Department of Labor.
Well, and on a broader level, those that have heard me talk about our platform strategy and how we're modernizing all of these platforms that we're talking about, whether it be Okta or OnBase or MuleSoft or Power BI or Salesforce, are things that are proven, and our architecture is built on these things working together. We want a deeper bench when it comes to our skill sets internally and thinking about our resources across the enterprise. So if someone leaves at the Department of Labor that's really good, and we need someone short term while we fill that role, we can take someone from the Department of Transportation and bring them over to help, or the Department of Human Services. And so by focusing on these common platforms, we're building that deeper bench and expertise that is really hard to do when you have 1,400 different types of applications across the enterprise, and trying to, you know, find someone to manage each one of those or understand those. So this is part of our larger approach. And all of these things have been used throughout the pandemic in other places besides labor as well. Probably the most prevalent is the Power BI stuff, where if you look at the COVID dashboards at all, either on the state site or one of the sites that links to it, you'll see it's a Power BI dashboard that gives you that information about the number of people vaccinated and tested. And, you know, we've had millions and millions of hits on our sites to these dashboards. So these tools are proven and used across multiple states. And we've certainly had a lot of success with them here on larger platforms here at the state.
Thank you, Secretary. The remaining piece, and it's the largest box, and it's not the largest not for a reason, which is the actual replacement of the mainframe. In our plan, this is going to be done over the following 3 phases after phase 1, which is anticipated to take up to 3 years and $26.5 million. It's based on the evaluation and selection of one of the 3 core systems that are available out there in the market today that other states have been using successfully. Those products are Reemploy, the Reemploy technology, which is part of the only consortium that has been successful in UI modernization, which is with Mississippi, which I mentioned earlier was one of the ones, because they had modernized, had, I guess, maybe slightly less pain going through the pandemic. That it's also in use at Maine, and the state of Connecticut is in the process of implementing it. Solid State has a product called Data Station that is in use in a number of states, Alabama being one of them. and also they were the successful ones to implement initially at the state of Idaho, which was supposed to be the springboard for the consortium, but the consortium itself didn't evolve appropriately to take advantage of that. But the product is out there, it's commercially available. And then Fast Enterprises. Some may recognize the company as the one that has done our tax modernization project. And they also have a product in the unemployment insurance space that will be considered to do that, really that core functionality in replacement of the mainframe. And take a pause there.
Yeah, and as many of you have probably heard me say, Fast is the product that we plan to use for the DMV modernization as well. We already have a contract with them in the DMV space and plan to continue under that contract to build out the rest of that system.
And I'm glad to answer any questions you may have on what we have here for our planned architecture for moving forward with this project.
I've got a couple of questions. We heard a lot over the past year from the Secretary of Labor or the Commissioner of Labor regarding the fragility of the mainframe system and concerns that some of the legislation that we were considering and some that we passed could jeopardize the stability of that system in the near term. Do you have any comments on that or thoughts on that?
Secretary, would you like to, or would you like me to?
Well, I mean, I think you have a deeper technical understanding of the different pieces, but you know, when we're talking about over 250,000 lines of code in a 50-year-old mainframe that runs 78 different programs that are pre-ASCII, and what pre-ASCII is it's a textual structure. So there's no structure to the database there, and there's limited amount of space in your binary code. So when you try to add a new program to that, it's extremely complex. In some cases, we've run out of room on the green screen and it's not as easy as just scrolling down when it comes to this 50-year-old technology, unfortunately. And it's you know, I think Commissioner Harrington articulated, as well as someone not in the technology field can, that, you know, let's not do this. It's extremely complex and it may not work based on the size of the mainframe and the amount of space that we have left. But Sean, you probably have more to add. We talked about this extensively, and you seem like you really had a good grasp on it.
Yeah, it's that frailty comes from a couple of things, but as the Secretary was saying, the data is not stored in a structured manner. It's a file that is unstructured. And what that means is that every time somebody even needs to pose what could be a simple question, if it's not been asked before, it requires a developer to go in and write a program to read the file in order to be able to extract that information. And so, unlike other modern systems where you have other skill sets that can do that work, finding a workforce, finding skilled people to help us manage this environment has been a challenge given the age of it. And so those are the things that really led to the concerns of frailty of it. It's around that code and being able to manage it and have enough resources to do proper maintenance and work upon the system. The infrastructure.
Well, and I think to expand on that, we did talk with several outside companies that offer COBOL program and thought that they may be able to help. We had companies across Vermont reach out to us saying, if you need someone, you think we have someone. When it comes to UI and the complexity around the program itself, the program being the actual business program, not the application here. It was very difficult for someone to come in and learn that and pick up what needed to change and where. So it wasn't just learning or finding that person that could develop. It was also trying to understand UI. And that's why, we pulled someone in from a different agency, or not from a different agency, excuse me, but that was deployed in a different area that had spent a lot of time on this in past years, because he was really the only one that had enough years of experience to understand the UI program, and was able to make those changes. But it certainly wasn't an easy thing for someone else to pick up. And we certainly tried to find outside vendors to help support us, but really haven't been successful in finding anyone. It's written before COBOL. It's actually called F-COBOL. It's the language before COBOL was written, to just, tell you how old it really is.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to do is just assess the risk vulnerability of where we are now vis-a-vis this, and whether or not whether or not this impacts what we're looking at as both potential timetables and also fallback solutions. How vulnerable is this to imminent failure, particularly given the fact that we may be making certain changes or requirements of the system based on legislation that we passed in the last session?
Sean,
It's a
do you want
great
to go?
question. Yeah, yeah. I was trying to get my thoughts about me because it's a great question. We need to modernize the system, right? At the end of the day, but we're not bought into the Big Bang theory by which we're going to try and just do this once and hope we get the next kind of end-to-end solution. That tends to not work well for Vermont. So to try and I won't say it's insurance, but to mitigate these concerns, we have moved the operations of the mainframe out of Vermont data centers into a hosted environment by a vendor, Blue Hill. So the physical infrastructure and the operating of that now is with a vendor that's been doing that well for us for the systems that we're still running from AHS, DMV, and AOT on the mainframe. So we feel we've mitigated that risk to a certain point. And we've also found we've had good luck with one staff augmentation vendor in finding staff through them that can help us maintain it. And we have one of them on board, one from that company on board currently, and we're working through, as we speak, adding 2 additional so that we can have that at least depth of bench to 3 deep to be able to have the staff to work through those things that come over the course of the next 3 to 4 years as we execute this modernization effort.
Right. To be clear, there's different pieces here, right? There's the maintenance and care and feeding of the mainframe and that staff aug contract that Sean's talking about. And then there's the actual application that I was talking about that you need to have specific UI knowledge about.
Correct.
Yes. So
When
can I sleep at night and comfortably, or should I stay awake worrying about this?
I'm worrying about it probably enough for both of us at this point. It keeps me up a lot thinking about it. And that's why there is no avenue that we're not exploring to help ensure the viability of the system until we can complete the modernization effort.
And I assume that I shouldn't assume, but in the event that we do have this catastrophic failure that Commissioner Harrington has been warning us about, from your perspective, are there any fallback positions?
We continue to do the proper, backups of the data as we can. and the code and manage the environment. The challenge being that we really worry about is that over the course of making an enhancement or a change to the actual application, we do something that we can't figure out a way to back out of. And so we're doing the due diligence that's appropriate, but there are, just based on the tenderness of the age of the system, it's still something that is a concern.
So when I think about the catastrophic failure, you and I may think about it a little differently. When I think about the catastrophic failure, I'm thinking about the mainframe dying itself, the hardware. And that's likely not going to happen. That we've, have processes and things in place to take care of. If a component dies, it's what Sean was talking about, the actual application and putting in a change that cripples the darn thing, right? And trying to figure out how to back it out through hundreds of thousands of lines of codes and getting it right. That's the more likely catastrophic failure that we would see, is, trying to implement a change at the legislature's direction in law and having it blow up the rest of the system.
Well, that's what the commissioner was talking about specifically.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Well, again, this is something we probably will need to come back to, but I don't want to delay the presentation and today's agenda further on it. But I think it's a really important issue that we really need to focus on. So thank you very much.
I believe there's at least some questions from other members.
This is Marty, and my comment was that I think, based upon what Senator Brock talked about, what we want to make sure is, at least into the future, we have a system that can allow more flexibility in case the legislature comes up with something, as they tried to do last term, that the commissioner just warned us would not work. And there had to be a compromise between the House and the Senate committees on what that extra supplemental benefit would be, simply because of the way it had to be implemented into the system. And what I think we want to be sure of in the new system is that there will be options for ad hoc changes if indeed the legislature comes up with something that needs to be implemented, maybe on a short-term basis or only to a few eligible recipients, or whatever the specific differences may be. We want to be able to have that flexibility. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like you're talking about making that possible.
Yes, that is definitely like the key takeaway from the entire pandemic, is that rigidity is not our friend moving forward when it comes to having a UI system that's going to support Vermonters' needs. And that is core to what we're going to be looking to have included as part of our future system.
All right. Any other questions from members of the committee?
Yes. So my question is for, I'm not sure if it's for Secretary Quinn or Sean or even JFO really. My question is around the cost. If we have a sense of the cost, I'm sure we do, of propping this system up, maybe said differently, how much we'll be saving when we get to the final phase 4 implementation, both in terms of operating and contracting, and also humans that are needed to run the system right now. And I understand that's a kind of a detailed question. I don't know if you have that information, Secretary Quinn, but it would be, I'm hopeful that we have that information somewhere. So directions on where to find it, if it's not readily available, would be appreciated.
Yeah, certainly. With every project, we do a business case, which we call an IT ABC form, where we try to collect all the costs of the way we currently do things, and then the way we'll be doing things in the future based on the information that we have at that time, right? So it's not always a cost savings in the traditional sense. In some cases, it costs more, but there's more functionality or a better service to our constituents, or better, more uptime, or there's a number of things that go into it. But we certainly do those business cases and have that available for the committee.
And I think we have that actually. We would have gotten that as part of the IT modernization work that was done in the Energy and Technology Committee, I think, right, this year.
Yes. Well, what I would say is we try to update those things as we go and as we learn more. And we're further in our planning than we were before. So we may have additional information in the newest ABC form.
Okay.
And we'll look at the two, compare them, and if there is additional or revised copy, we will send it to the committee.
Great. Thank you.
And as a follow-up, if I could, to the location of those resources, would you be able to speak a little bit about how far abroad you've got to go in order to find support resources for the current system and platform? And if the new systems and platforms would be able to be supported more locally?
Yes. I don't know if you want to start, Secretary Quinn, or if you'd like me to go.
Go ahead. I'll fill in if.
Thank you. Currently, we're having to reach out primarily to the Southeast. Florida has been where most of the resources reside that have been able to help us out. But there's also been success. So one of the reasons why we went with Blue Hill for hosting is Blue Hill resides in Southern New York State, and there is still folks from the financial industry that have these skills that are available to help. So between that area and pretty much Florida area is where we've been having to reach to find skilled information workers to help us maintain this system currently. With regards to moving forward, that is one of the reasons why we've selected the technologies that we have to put forth in front of you today, is that we, as the Secretary was saying in the beginning, we're building on these as like core competencies for the state of Vermont and expect to be able to maintain these moving forward. Some ourselves, but also with localized vendors when needed.
Yeah. I think that the piece that is still a little bit up in the air is around that bigger box, the mainframe replacement UI administration function. Depending on which model we go with or which technology, whether it be reemploy or FAST, each one brings a different skill set. And I'll use FAST as an example, where they bring in their own people and support the system. Fortunately, those people move here, they raise their families here, they go to school here. So it's not a model where they come in for 6 months and leave. They come in and stay and manage it. With reemploy, I don't have enough specifics about it to say what the resourcing would need to be there, but just to give you an example, each one would need to be a little different probably in the way we resource that.
Other questions for members of the committee? One thing that I look at as I look at the chart with the variety of vendors that you have selected, and I'm sure you've selected them based on their past histories and backgrounds, but I still have trouble with some of our past history when we select IT vendors who have not have been carefully vetted as far as due diligence. And I'd be comforted to know that you have a process in place in which there is effective due diligence of every major vendor, including a look at their litigation history, past allegations of misconduct, and those kinds of things in other states, because we've been burned repeatedly in the past by not having done that. Are we doing that now?
Yes, I'm a fairly risk-averse person. And what I would say, there's multiple steps in place, not only at the vendor level, but when we start a project, we have to do an independent review where a third party comes in and digs into the background, financially and as far as what they've done in other states. We personally reach out to other states and talk with other states. Another major platform that we're considering in one of our spaces recently showed up in a news article as having project problems. So we talked to the state. I called the state almost immediately and talked to their CIO and got to the bottom of what the issue was, and it wasn't the technology, and got a good understanding of the vendor that was implementing was the issue. And so we've, they're on a watch list, so to speak. So when they respond to an RFP, we kind of know that they've had issues in the past, and to work around those issues. But yes, certainly we like to vet our companies as best we can.
Well, as time is elapsing, perhaps we should try to move on to finish your presentation so that we can go on with the rest of our agenda today.
Senator Brock, could I just jump in with a quick question? Sure. Thank you. The costs are so staggering. For any of us who, I don't know. I mean, even to the scale of the problem versus the cost of what we're essentially forced to spend for a solution is somewhat shocking. And you mentioned, was it Reemploy that is being used in Connecticut and Maine? Mm-hmm. I know we've had actually not great luck joining forces with other states, but while obviously the amount of users coming through a system would have some bearing on the cost, but our little state and versus what they're paying in Connecticut or Massachusetts or New York, I'm curious if you've explored basically any bulk purchase options for just, let's say, the mainframe. Obviously, there's tons of customization and it's more complicated than I can get my head around. But are we exploring those kinds of potential solutions and ways of savings and efficiencies?
Yeah, I'll talk at a broader level, and then Sean can tell you what we've done in this space, and the different people we've talked to. But that's some of the reason why we're using, why our platform strategy is in place, is to drive down those user costs to a point where we're maximizing and leveraging our buying power as much as possible. And through the National Association of State CIOs, I also talked with the other CIOs about what they're paying. And at what point did they tip the scale, and was it worthwhile? And so we have a lot of those conversations to drive down the price as far as possible. And where we started with our, I believe that I'm going to get the number a little wrong, but for optics, I'll tell you where we started with our Salesforce costs and where we ended up saved us like $2 million in the end over the licensure period. So we're certainly doing exactly what you'd like to see. The costs are still crazy high, but based on what we're seeing in other states, we're not out there alone. And Sean, do you just want to talk a little bit about how you came up with the estimates here and how
Yes.
we feel there's some certainty around these numbers?
So we've been talking to the vendors and continue to talk to the vendors and our peer states. A lot of this was done in cooperation with discussions with Connecticut and the Connecticut Department of Labor. The challenge and the actual numbers for both duration of the phases and total costs were confirmed with those conversations with Connecticut. Our estimates are sound. And that's working with a state that is part of a consortium. They even went so far as to offer us, because they used a mainframe that was COBOL, not pre-COBOL, but a very similar platform and stuff. They even offered up resources, documents, things like that might help jumpstart us if we go that route. The challenge being is that as much as unemployment insurance comes from US DOL, there are nuances to every state. And it's that kind of customization that comes in and implementation on a state-by-state basis that keeps it from being something that we can literally say, hey, state of Connecticut, let's go halves on this. So the costs, what they represent are what it would take to implement in Vermont and leverage the work that's been done to date as part of that, say in the case of the Reemploy USA, if that's the successful product. If it's not, the prices start to go up from there. So we are doing, I feel, due diligence to truly understand the entire landscape and make sure that we're doing this as appropriate for Vermont. And the other piece is you alluded to that, scale may be a factor in pricing, but there's a basic level that if you have to provide a function for one user or 100,000 users, the cost of getting that basic function still carries a kind of like a minimum price of entry. So I hope that addresses it between the secretary and I, kind of.
Okay, thank you. Can we move on then, Sean, to the remainder of your presentation?
This is just kind of a quick recap of what we have talked about so far, which is kind of base schedule and cost estimates, 12 to 15 months for the first phase of 4 phases, coming in at $3.5 million with total price tag for the project at $30 million. 2 things that are kind of new that we're introducing on this slide is the maintenance and operation cost. This was Connecticut couldn't say enough about planning on 20% of your total investment being available year after year for maintenance, operations, and enhancements. So in other words, if you don't do diligence in this space, future generations will be in the same predicament we're in now, right? So this is the cost of maintaining once we get modernized and keeping it modernized. So planning that we need to do for that. And then just making a note that because of phase 1 is going to be on the Salesforce platform, and phases 2, 3, and 4 will be on one of the core system replacements, there will be 2 distinct procurements as part of this project.
And when will you be ready for the first RFP?
We're finishing the actual RFP and scope of work as we speak. So it will be available for going out once the money has been released. So we've targeted having it ready for July 1. So the RFP has been a work in progress as we've been preparing for this, for phase 1.
Please continue.
Some may have seen this before, and I want to share it, and I'll just be brief. This is like a roadmap. So what this is taking we keep talking about 4 phases of modernization. This takes a roadmap approach and says, this is what from a more defined functional area will be included in phase 1. What functions are in phase 2, 3, 4, respectively. And since we did that mapping, I just wanted to share it with the group today. This is like an evolution of some of the documentation that at least was shared with House Energy and Technology to understand what functions will be coming in what sequence over the course of the project.
Well, I'm sure that the House has better eyesight than I do, but when I printed this out, I couldn't even read it with a magnifying glass.
I'll work with and see if we can get a better copy for you.
Thank you.
I think it speaks to how many different programs and nuances are in the UI system.
Yeah. And I just want to finish up with and we've talked a lot about this up until this point, but what's gone into getting to this, right? How do we know what we've put forth in front of you is a valid approach? How do we know it's going to pay dividends? It's appropriate. So what we've been doing is we've been talking to peer states. I cite Connecticut. Both the secretary and I are involved with NASCIO, the National Association of State Chief Information Officers. We've used that channel to have discussions with what other states are doing, where their preference is. There's a National Association of State Workforce Agencies, NASWA. And we have an ongoing conversation that they're facilitating with the states of California, Georgia, and Arizona, because they were informed of our approach. So what I showed you in the slide with Salesforce for the outward facing piece, and then a core engine for mainframe replacement of mainframe, is been very appealing to these states. And so we actually have a follow-up meeting coming up, I believe, next week, where the interest is there. And that, to me, helps validate the approach, right? That when we start looking at, when other states are intrigued by what you're putting forth, there may, and this gets back to Senator Pearson's question, this may evolve into something that helps us drive down cost in the future by having other states interested in the approach we're putting forth here. And then we've also been talking to, or continue to talk to, the vendors that are the major players in this area, which is TCS, Tata Consulting Services. They're the vendor for the Reemploy USA, which you can see there is in use at Mississippi, Maine, and soon to be Connecticut. Solid State Operations, their product, which is Idaho and Alabama. And then Fast Enterprises, which is their tax portion is in California, Illinois, and Montana. Their benefits, UI benefits in Washington, and then Michigan uses both pieces of it. So this is kind of a summary of how we got here to the design, the architecture that we put forth today. And that's going to wrap it up from myself. And
okay.
Any final questions anyone may have.
Well, again, thank you. Thank you very much, Senator Chittenden.
So thank you, great presentation. And I'm going to say something, I'm new to a lot of this, so I'm sure our RFP process is already well articulated. It's unclear to me how much Jitoc, this body, is going to be a part of that RFP process, if at all. But one thing I would say from my personal experience, I heard you mention that FAST you're currently using for a DMV implementation. I would strongly encourage it's clearly articulating the evaluation criteria in some form of decision matrix to help justify and clearly communicate to, I'm sure you're probably already doing this, so I'm telling you stuff you already know, but a decision matrix can do a really good job of communicating to groups like this, as well as the public at large, how we came to conclude or support one vendor over the other, or one platform over the other. It also does a good job of leading us away from any decisional bias we might have with vendors that we already have relationships with, like with FAST. But I think you already know this, so I'm going to stop saying stuff that you've already heard and already know in your professional experience.
I'll just touch on that really quickly. We do have all of those processes and administrative policies in place from a executive branch standpoint. But I would say that, once we've chosen a platform, we like to stick with that platform because it gives us the ability to drive down the cost and gives us that resource expertise. And we know that we've been successful with them. DMV is one of those areas that scares me because we've had failures there before in the modernization space, probably 10 years ago or so. And so, when I look at those really big implementations, I want to know who we're doing business with can have success in this area and will be successful and will keep us out of the paper and deliver us a product that they say they will.
Thank you. You're going to stay with us, Secretary Quinn, for the remainder, because some of the issues that we may talk and the rest of this may impact your organization, if you do have the time.
Okay. I can do that.
Great, thank you. The next item is a committee discussion and update in which we have Kevin Moore, the Director of IT for Legislative Information Technology. Kevin, are you with us? I don't see you on my screen. I'm sure you're here somewhere.
Mr. Chair, I'm certainly here.
Great, thank you very much. Perhaps if we could just start with just a 3 to 5 minute overview from Legislative IT as to whether or not there's anything that you think should be brought to our attention at this point. We'll obviously go into more depth in later meetings.
So certainly, I have just a series of comments. I'm not sure they all stay with just future work, but more of a brief overview of what we're doing now. I wasn't entirely sure what to expect from this conversation. So if that's appropriate, I'm
Sure.
happy to go that way. So obviously, thank you again for the record, Kevin Moore, Director of IT for the legislature. So as you're all aware, it's been a rather challenging 14 months for us. And I just want to take a moment to say that the ingenuity and flexibility of our IT staff, which is a rather small group, was certainly tested over those 14 months. And I'm incredibly proud of the work that they've done and to ensure that the legislative process was able to continue during the pandemic. Our response was so successful among our peer organizations that we actually did a bunch of consultation work and provided guidance to other states. I don't have the list in front of me at this point in time, but we also included one U.S. Senate office as well in order to provide their guidance or provide guidance on how to respond and work in this remote world from a legislative perspective. We're now shifting our focus, obviously, now that we're out of our primary session. We have three imminent timelines that we're looking at. Mid-July for the reintroduction of State House hosted hybrid meetings. So that's something that we're really focusing on. Introduction of new technology, audiovisual. For those of you who may not appreciate the nuances in our industry, AV, while certainly converging with IT, they're not the same. We are IT professionals, we're not AV professionals. So we're working with other folks to make sure that we're providing the best quality services we can and to make sure that we are planning for a successful return to hybrid legislation. We also have a potential October session for the adjournment resolution. So we want to be mindful of that time frame and ensure that we are not disrupting services during that time. And then, of course, January of 22, where we anticipate that we'll be largely back in person, but also providing hybrid services during that time frame. What we're doing right now to get from A to B, we have a lot of other pieces and parts before we get back to what we consider our normal IT operations. We have two newly acquired buildings within the Capitol complex, 2 and 4 Aiken. So we are planning for those offices. What they look like. There are many decisions yet to be made on how to occupy those spaces, and based off the occupancy of those spaces, it changes how we apply technology. We anticipate soon to be working with BGS planners to design and plan the future home of our legislative IT operations. We're currently in a building that BGS would love to sell. It's an expensive old Victorian building to maintain. So we're working on a future home. In coordination with that, we're also working on a future data center location to get us out of our server room in the basement of the State House, which is less than ideal for all the environmental reasons that we can begin to think of. We are recovering and reinstalling equipment from 133 to 109 back into the State House because we are on that 30-day countdown now that the emergency order was lifted effective yesterday. So we want to make sure that we have all of that equipment ready and available for folks. And then we are likely to backfill, depending on decisions made, into 109 State Street, 133 State Street, 2 and 4 Aiken, depending on those decisions too. We're working with parliamentarians, the Sergeant at Arms, many other offices to ensure that all the IT needs are met, not only for the return in January of 22, but all of these other stages that we talked about. They're working on the fly as well, trying to understand the needs of the respective bodies. And we want to make sure that we meet them where they are. We also have a newly established human resources office. So we're working with human resources to establish policies, both for personnel and technology use. So that's a huge priority of ours throughout the summer. We're looking to begin a hiring process for a new web developer. We don't have a dedicated web developer on site, and we really need to do so. So that was approved through the appropriations process and Joint Legislative Management Committee this past session. The intent is to bring our core development back in-house rather than being so dependent on third-party vendors. And I don't want to continue because Rep. Sebelia, I saw your hand pop up here, so I want to answer questions before we move on.
Yeah, just a quick question about the web developer. Tell me a little bit more about what, I have no idea why you would need a web developer, Kevin.
So the web developer that we need is to maintain not only the General Assembly's public-facing websites, but the internal web-based applications that we have. So we have intranet sites, we have various web-based applications that are in use throughout the General Assembly, running on some older, not ancient, but older technologies. We want to modernize those and make sure that we can provide a more nimble response for any kind of changes that are being requested of us and of those applications rather than being dependent on a third party. And to be frank, we're not the only priority for these third party vendors. So we're not always at the highest priority level for them. So the response time is not always as quick as we expect in the legislative world. Generally speaking, when we have a technical issue in the legislature, we have an expectation of minutes or moments to resolve an issue, rather than waiting in a traditional sense for several hours on a standard service level agreement response time. So we want to bring the controls back in house, provide that nimbleness, and really expand our services beyond what we currently provide.
So I just want to follow up really quickly. In addition to the General Assembly's website, I heard you say we have other websites.
We have other internal sites, and so in applications. So an intranet-based application, for example, each office of the General Assembly leverages it differently, whether it's for internal database interactions, or analysis, or personnel policies. So it really varies quite dramatically depending on the office that is using it. I don't feel like I'm answering your question.
Yeah,
I want to get there. I want to understand your question.
Are you talking about like the speaker's website and the pro tem's website? I mean, what?
So that would be a future component. So the speaker and the pro tem's website are currently hosted outside of the legislature.vermont.gov domain. And that is just a long-standing, the way we've always done it type of situation. We would be more than happy to accommodate those offices and provide a legislature.vermont.gov site for them. But historically speaking, they have stayed on the ADS side of things just for convenience purposes. So we would like to bring that in-house.
Can you give me an example of an internal website outside of the General Assembly? I'm just not sure that I'm getting it. Is it like a committee web?
So no. So anything that's public facing is obviously very public facing. Our legislative General Assembly website is very deep, and it is quite integrated into our database systems, and it's all live updates, almost all live updates, very dynamic. The internal side is far more static. So I'm going to just stick with the intranet essentially at this point. It's a internally developed application that leverages existing security controls to ensure that departmental needs are met, whether it's document organization, data points. So legislative counsel, for example, when you're talking about number of draft requests or who's assigned what content, what material, all of those data points are internal data points that are much more accessible to the end users via a web page rather than trying to interact with a complicated database in a custom application.
Okay, so this would be something that, for instance, Leg Council has their own kind of internal management. You have your own Sergeant at Arms, perhaps.
Sergeant at Arms,
Okay,
Senate Secretary, Joint Fiscal to a lesser extent because they have a huge public-facing focus as well. And there are other applications which are pending that we have been unable to develop due to the lack of this resource.
Okay, and to circle all the way back to where we started, so this web developer is coming in to help make sure all of that is running smoothly so that we no longer have to rely on contracted services that are sometimes not available when we need them.
Correct.
Do we expect increase, decrease in cost?
So it's going to be a parallel expense for this first year is what we're anticipating. So we're still going to have that contracted vendor for this first year, approximately. I don't want to commit to only a year, while our new web developer is able to get up to speed, assume responsibility for the existing systems, and then begin future planning. Once we start hitting that future planning perspective, we anticipate being able to shed those third-party contracted services, purchase services.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on that before I move on?
No. Please.
Excellent. So the other thing is we have two other big components that we're really looking forward to in the near future. The first one being the completion of a statewide voice over IP telephony contract. That contract, once it's established, is going to allow us, the legislative branch, to be able to take advantage of the economies of scale provided by the other two branches to provide a low-cost voice over IP telephone system for the legislature. It's long been awaited. It's something that we are in desperate need of, but going out on our own is just not cost effective for us. So we're waiting for that completion, which I understand is imminent. I'm not sure if that's today or a couple of weeks from now, but they're certainly in the final stages. Once that happens, it'll allow us to move forward with that project, and we're pretty excited. The second piece is a pending collaboration with the Agency of Digital Services over a new cybersecurity training platform. So we have had very basic initial conversations with Scott Carby, the Chief Information Security Officer for the Agency of Digital Services, on working towards a common platform for cybersecurity training for all branches of government. They provide those services to the judiciary, and we'll be leveraging those same services, hopefully leveraging those same services, again, taking advantage of the economies of scale and taking advantage of the consistency in the platform. Once that's available, we hope to be able to immediately extend it out to not only staff, but legislators as well, and add that to our newly established training program. That's in a nutshell what we're focusing on in the next 12 to 18 months. Beyond that, what do we need from Jitoc? So it's really a comprehensive discussion about the legislature's desire for future technology integration. What does that really mean? What technology platforms have you seen in other legislatures that we want to take advantage of? What are we missing? Where do we want to go from here? And it's not always an answer of whether or not the technology is available, but whether or not we want to accept that technology into our legislative process. Two key components that are always batted back and forth are electronic voting, whether or not we want to have an electronic roll call voting system installed in the House chamber or Senate chamber alike, whether it's necessary, whether it's wanted. The systems and solutions are certainly available, but is that something we should plan for or not? Another one that is certainly batted back and forth is live streaming. Do we live stream audio only, video too? Do we live stream only? Is it archived? Is it chambers only? Is it the committees? What extent does that look like, and what level of integration is desirable from the legislature? We certainly have recommendations, and we certainly have different directions to go, depending on what the General Assembly would like. But that's the comprehensive discussion that we're looking for. That will in turn inform our strategic planning, our long-range planning, which in turn informs our budget requests to make sure that we're always in line and moving forward. That's what we're hoping for. I'm hopeful that answers your questions, Mr. Chair.
Are you discussing any of these issues with the Legislative Management Committee?
So we have. So one of the issues that we've discussed in the past, and the way our statute, Legislative Information Technology statute, was written is specific that the management, personnel, budget, all of that general direction comes from Joint Legislative Management Committee, but the advisory role for technology integration and desires comes from Jitoc. I think I have the statutory citation in front of me. Bear with me. Let me make sure I don't want to misquote it here, miscite it. So our statute is, oh no, so it's going to be under yours actually. So it's going to be 2 VSA section 614, specifically item 2, section 2 under powers and duties. So it says the committee may provide advice to the Director of Legislative IT and JLMC as appropriate regarding matters related to information technology. And so that's where that back and forth conversation, from my perspective, should come from, to ensure that we are moving in the direction that the General Assembly wants. We have had some of those preliminary conversations. They have not been detailed conversations with the Management Committee, but it's been specific to which direction we want to go again for live streaming. And I provided some examples of where we could go and what type of dashboard style systems we could provide.
Okay.
Senator Brock, quick question. Kevin, can you give us a sense of timing that in your world where we would provide you some feedback, ideally?
Obviously, our timeline has been shifted a little bit due to the last year. So I think things were tabled when we didn't want them to be. So we are really hopeful to continue our strategic planning discussions with offices throughout the General Assembly. And then we want to take that to this committee and have that discussion. Our hopeful timeframe is sometime this fall. Obviously, if we're in session in October, that's going to bump some of what our support requirements are. and that could bump the time frame. But we really want to start having that discussion this fall so we can bring a completed draft of our strategic plan, which is a statutory charge of ours, to JLMC for early January.
Great, thank you.
Do we have a representative judiciary with us here today? I guess we do not. I know we've had a request. One question, and this is for Secretary Quinn. As you recall, in prior meetings, we have inquired as to the degree of meetings and interaction between the three branches of government regarding IT. And I'm curious as to whether or not that is continued during the pandemic.
We have met with Doug and Kevin, not super recently, but we've been keeping in contact specifically, with what we're doing. Kevin gave a great example of the cybersecurity collaboration around the awareness training, and because judiciary has services, we talk with them extensively as well. I don't off the top of my head remember the last actual date that the three of us met. Yesterday seems like a year ago, and a year ago seems like yesterday, but we have been following that direction.
Okay, well, that would be kind of a curious question as to whether yesterday is 7 months ago. And whether or not the degree of contact is sufficient to ensure that we do have an enterprise view to the extent that we can of information technology, and particularly cybersecurity.
Right, and I think we helped the judiciary out with some of the requests for technology around video in the courtrooms, and I was asking Kevin for information on committee rooms and what they're using for cameras, and trying to understand what not only the best solution is but potentially ways to drive down the cost for the three of us, and whether or not there was something there.
Representative Sibilia, you had a comment?
I do not, actually. I'm good.
We obviously have a limited period of time today. We have about 5 minutes left, and the last item on the agenda was to talk at least briefly about future meeting plans. This biennium, or this is sort of a hybrid biennium because it crosses two, that from the committee's perspective, I would like very much to try to do three things. First is to go back to the inventory that we began collecting some time ago of all of the systems across state government, identifying what systems we have, who's responsible for them, and who's managing and overseeing them. And then what is the state of those systems in terms of potential risks, so that we begin risk ranking what we have, so that we are aware of those systems that may blow up on us or that may need more attention than perhaps we're getting them, so that we get, from an oversight perspective, an overview of where we are. And to that end, I would ask Secretary Quinn to perhaps take a look back at the inventory that we created some time ago and try to bring that up to date, and then perhaps give us some feedback as to how long it might take you to at least basically do that, so that we have that picture that we can look at. If not at the next meeting, then at least at some time in the reasonable future. The second thing that I'd like to do and concentrate on a bit is cybersecurity, because of the risks that it places on the enterprise and the problems that we certainly see everywhere regarding everything from system hijacking to ransomware and the like, that has to represent a priority for us to ensure that we're comfortable with the state of cybersecurity. And then lastly, to look at our specific charge that we have both in legislation, and in particular at those things that we've been asked to do by the legislature in the past year, that I know Becky is indicating that we're collecting now, and we should hopefully have available to review before our next agenda, before our next meeting, to see where we stand there. In terms of the meeting times and schedules and frequency, I'd be interested whether any committee member has any thoughts regarding, should we meet monthly? Should we meet more or less frequently than that? should we meet for 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, given the kind of charge that we have, and whether or not there are any opinions that any of you have that we should perhaps talk about and think about on any of those scores. Senator Chittenden?
I'll say one thing, Senator Brock. I really appreciate your framing of the 3 topics to focus on. And I think the first 2 really intersect well with an interest area I have that also addresses crypto or our security, or as well as the inventory of our systems. And it comes back to the question I asked earlier in the presentation. I'd love to know how we are managing identities across all of these systems. And that really addresses security. So if it's not, we're not managing identity with the Okta system or some unified authentication platform for all internal state employees as well as legislators, I'd want to know why. And moving us towards and starting to require a unified authentication platform is how UVM 10, 20 years ago got to a single sign-on and really got to better control over the security of our platforms, because that's where we can track who gets access to what, and also auditing and recording all of those interfaces. So I'm really excited about how you laid out those 3 pieces. As for the frequency of meeting, I'm new to this, and I really would take your lead as the chair as to how often we should meet.
Thank you, Senator Chittenden. Any other thoughts on any of those questions?
Senator, we've got a couple of hands in the queue.
We do?
Yes. So
Okay. Go ahead, because I don't see them on my screen, but maybe my screen. I do. I see Catherine Benham, and I see Representative Sibilia. So let's take Representative Sibilia first.
yeah. So I would I concur with those items, also making sure that we are providing what's necessary for Kevin, prioritizing that, and monitoring the rollout and expenditure of the pretty significant federal fund investments that we're making in IT. Just getting some regular updates from ADS on how those are rolling out. And then I would suggest that we meet probably for 3 hours once a month, or if it's less time, then maybe more frequently. So.
Okay. So Catherine Benham.
Good morning. I'm Catherine Benham with the Joint Fiscal Office. And I know Becky Wasserman is bringing to you the list of all the things that you're tasked with, but I wanted particularly to raise the unemployment insurance language in the budget bill, that they will not receive the funds won't be released until then. There's some very specific language about what you all need to review. So I just wanted to get that on the plate. We have Dan Smith also, who's been looking at that as well. So I don't want to lose sight of that particular piece. I don't know what the timing is yet. We can work offline on that as well.
Yeah, the timing is important. That's one of the reasons I asked the question regarding when that first phase RFP is ready, because I'm mindful of our charge to approve certain funding. And I'm thinking that we should have, again, regardless of the meeting scheduling that we think about in terms of frequency, we should schedule a meeting probably early in July, assuming that RFP will be done and the project will be better defined by the end of this month, in order to deal with that and to do what we're supposed to do regarding what's in the big bill. Any other comment on frequency and timing and length of time? Representative Feltus?
Yes, I wanted to comment, certainly following up on what Catherine said regarding the budget language, because the budget language was rather specific. But one of those items in that budget language is talking about personnel to be available to actually work on the project and then actually implement it when the time comes. And that for me means talking also with the Department of Labor regarding their plans in terms of personnel that could be dedicated to this, so that we know that we've got people available and who would be assigned and who would be dedicated to working on this 3-year project. So I think we need to hear that before we make any other decisions, or before we make the final decision. And also part of that budget language was to hear from, an outside technical review. And I just wanted to call our attention also to S62, in section 14, there's just a discussion of a report through the state auditor regarding information technology for the unemployment insurance process as well. Unfortunately, that report is not due until December. But I think we need to take a look at that language to see if that would affect our timeline in terms of taking care of this Jitoc responsibility that's in the budget.
Thanks for pointing that out. Appreciate that. Okay. Any other comment at this point?
Yeah, Senator Brock.
Yeah.
I guess I'm curious, maybe it's a question for legislative council, but are we, with the executive order, emergency order lifted, are we now meant to meet in person? And that would surely inform our scheduling.
So that is a great question that I don't know the answer to right now. I don't know if Kevin or Catherine has more information, but what I've been hearing is that the State House will start opening for meetings, but I also think that there's availability to have, for those who would like to Zoom into a meeting, have it be a hybrid meeting. But I don't know that there's a set policy yet that's been stated on in-person meetings.
Yeah. And I think that really is going to be something that the Joint Rules Committee is going to have to deal with as well. And we have not met to deal with it yet. We had the anticipation was that committee meetings would be held remotely until the State House and the associated spaces were actually available to be able to physically accommodate the meeting schedule, which looks like there may be some time. So I think this is going to be an issue that Joint Rules is going to have to deal with. And I will make contact to the chair of Joint Rules to ask that question today. Anything else? We're about 2 minutes over our allotted time, and I do, if possible, like to end on schedule if we can. I will send out or ensure that we send out a doodle poll or something like that to check availability for our next meeting, which I would like to schedule sometime in early July if that works with everyone's schedules. So on that note, again, thank you very, very much for all of you for attending. I think we accomplished a great deal of ground today. We've got a lot more to go, but I think this is a great start for the next 2 years. So